Well, hi, hello, and welcome to a look into Snyk's 2024 State of Open Source Report. Today's exciting webinar is sponsored by Snyk and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Jess Steinbach. I'm with Actual Tech Media, a future B2B company, and I am so happy that I get to be your moderator today because I love when we get the chance to take data and reporting off the page and really just bring it to life. And that's what we're here to do today. With the help of two leading experts, we will explore and unpack the 2024 State of Open Source Report by Snyk. We're going to break out those key takeaways. We're going to talk about those trends, key and important insights. Our expert presenters are going to really bring that data to life and help us understand what our peers and this report can tell us about securing open source software. This is going to be such an interesting conversation. I cannot wait to dive in. So I'm going to start out with just a few housekeeping points that are going to help you get the most out of our conversation here together today, and then we will get this show on the road. Okay, let's start out with a little bit of a tour of your audience console. I want to start out with the questions window. I see some wonderful highs and hellos. I see Morteza wishing everyone a happy holiday season. We are deep in the thick of it, aren't we? Everything is just absolutely crazy and wild, and I'm so appreciative that all of you have taken time out of your, I'm sure, very busy days to come and join in this conversation. So as we go through our time today, let's make sure we get the most out of it. Make sure you are getting those questions in, get involved, get interactive, post all of the ideas that you have. Our speakers are leaving lots of time for some Q&A at the end, so we want to make sure that we get to have that fun discussion. So keep those questions rolling in. Give us a little hi, hello if you haven't already done so right now. We'll give that questions window a little test run. Hey, Jeffrey. Hey, Rakesh. Hey, John. We got a whole awesome crew here with us. So keep that rolling in. We want to hear from you. Now that questions window is also where you're going to reach out and let us know if you do have any tech gremlins in the system today. Hopefully that doesn't come up. Hopefully there are no gremlins that have been fed after midnight. But if somebody made that fatal flaw and there's a tech gremlin in your system today, no problem. The first thing you're going to try is a browser refresh. I promise the browser refresh is going to get rid of most of those little techie things. But if the browser refresh does not work for you, you can post in that questions window. Let us know that you're having a little bit of trouble and our team will be there to help you out. Okay, so we've got the questions window. We're going to take one little hop on over to the handouts tab. Make sure you spend some time exploring that handouts tab. Lots of cool resources and takeaways. Great way to follow up on the conversation we're going to have today, including the report that we're talking about. So if you like to follow along with that report, make sure that you've got that handouts tab open. Get all those cool resources to follow up once we wrap our webinar. And it is not just cool resources that we have as a giveaway today. We also have a $250 Amazon gift card that we'll be offering as a prize drawing at the end of our webinar. Now, of course, you do need to be here in live attendance in order to qualify to win that prize. And all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. If you are not sure what those T's and C's are, no problem. I don't expect you to have those memorized. They are listed for you back in that handouts tab that we were chatting about earlier. So just click in, scroll down, and you will find the full T's and C's waiting for you there. All right, well, if that wasn't enough excitement, I've got one more little prize I know you were all waiting for. That is the best question gift card. So we have a $50 Amazon gift card going to the best question asked. Now, here's the fun part about how we choose that. After we wrap the webinar, we look at all the questions asked throughout the webinar, and we choose the best question from that whole list. So even if your question doesn't get asked and answered during our live Q&A, which hopefully we can get to all of them, but sometimes they go very quickly, right? And there's lots of chatter to be had. So if your question doesn't get asked, don't panic. You are still entered to win. And of course, we make sure that all the questions that you ask get sent to the Snyk team, so you are going to get responses back, even if we don't get into your question today. So get those fingers limbered up, get ready to rock here, and make sure you are getting those questions in. All right, well, that was it for housekeeping. We covered a lot of information very quickly, and it is just the tip of the iceberg because we have so much more to cover today. And I am so excited to introduce you all to our expert presenters here with us from the Snyk team. And that is Jamie Smith, Product Marketing Director, and Richard Sherrod, Staff Product Manager. Let's get Jamie and Richard on out here with me. Hey guys, I know you've got a ton of info to cover. We've got a lot of insights in store for us. We definitely want to leave time for Q&A. We got a lot to do. So Jamie, I'm going to step back. I'm going to hand things right on over to you.
All right. Hey folks, my name is Jamie Smith. I'm part of the product marketing team here at Snyk. Richard, do you want to introduce yourself so we can also do a mic check?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Richard Sherrod, Staff Product Manager here at Snyk, and I'm overseeing the Snyk open source product.
Excellent. All right, so let's jump right into it. So the topic here, reducing fatigue. Now, I don't know if anybody here has looked at the the survey report yet, but we're going to go into some detail. Hopefully it'll be something we say that makes you want to go and look at it in further detail. Really, this is the state of open source security report. And just couple high level things, background of why we do this. Snyk is really at the forefront of developer first software security. Open source software is everywhere. It makes up a bulk of projects these days. You might hear numbers 70%, 80, 90% of modern projects really are based, really are the code from open source projects. One area that we're going to kind of jump into a bit is one of the trends that we saw is the concept of like fix fatigue, I guess what we'll call it. We want to try to help you figure out ways to alleviate fix fatigue and really a little bit more effective prioritization of what you really need to fix first. Some of the questions also delve into the software supply chain security challenge. Now, open source and software supply chain security are really kind of intertwined. It's, a lot of the stuff that's in the software supply chain. We're not going to go into a bunch of details and define this, but they really go hand in hand. And when you start talking about software security, moving up and thinking about the bigger picture can help you with the more fine-grained things. Just a quick overview. There's a report link for this. You can get a PDF. I think that just said it's linked in the handouts. There's also a blog post. There's going to be a link, the full URL at the bottom here. We have an interactive web link coming up, but I was hoping that was going to be out before the webinar today, but that's not available. But if you look on the Snyk webpage in the near future, maybe next week, that should be out live, and it's going to be kind of cool. All right, so just a quick little overview of what the survey was. We surveyed like over 450 technologists across like application development, security. There were a lot of questions that we had last year that we redid. So there's some releases where we can actually compare like the trends as opposed to just raw numbers. There were some yes, no questions, stack ranking kinds of things. And in the result, it came down to 4 different report sections. The first section is just the slowing expansion in OS security, open source software security, and some signs of AppSec exhaustion. Now that this isn't alarmist. This is just, this is kind of showing trends. The other side of this is also, monetary concerns and budget constraints and things in the today's economy, hopefully get past that. Certain aspects of software supply chain security that remain immature that can, maybe some of those low hanging fruit that we can talk about. This is one of my favorite parts of this. It's a small part of the thing, but it's a general we'll call it misplaced confidence in AI generated code. We have some mixed results that one answer belies the other. And finally, the encouraging aspect of the evidence of the maturity and growing and speed in the open source security process. All right, I promise it's not going to be me talking the whole time. We're going to have Richard in here, but I'm kind of giving some of this front matter here. I want to talk a little bit about when we talk about the software supply chain, but not that itself, but where the questions really cover. Now we're Snyk. We put a lot of emphasis on the developer. We ask some questions about generative AI. Do you use it? What about it concerns you? What impacts are you seeing from it? We've explored the open source ecosystem, and it kind of covers a lot of like open source libraries and packages, but it also kind of touches a little bit on containers. Most container based images are pretty much open source and freely available. We asked things about like SCM checks and where you're checking, where in the SDLC are you doing your tests, where, how often, things like that. And of course, you kind of can't really think about open source security and supply chain security without thinking about SBOMs. And, if you don't know what SBOM is, software bill of materials is basically the menu, the ingredients of what is in your software. We want to see where in the SDLC teams are building in security, what they're doing to make it happen. And let's start digging into the results. So the first section, it's this concept of the slowing expansion open source security efforts. And how it helps DevOps more broadly. Across the questions, we saw some change year to year, some trends good, some trends bad. And sometimes when you see a bad trend or something that looks bad, the other side of it is what's coming. Like one thing goes down, but something that goes up, something else goes up. And sometimes the thing that goes up is actually a better thing. All right, so we're going to start digging into some of these things. kind of some background of how teams work. So this is, like I said, this is broken up into 4 different core sections. The sections aren't the same size. So like the first 2 sections are really big, and then the later sections are a little bit smaller. Just to get an idea of how other people work. This gives you, maybe you can equate this to how your organization works and kind of considerations there. So really 82% of orgs, they ship code at least weekly. We see a little trend here. There's some monthly, there's quite a few daily, but daily to weekly is the big thing. The key thing here though is that only 45% of them are auditing their software, their code daily. Now that means open source projects and potentially, first party code. And that's a little bit disconcerting in the fact that things can happen. Oops, sorry. I wasn't ready for that. So sorry, my little thing here isn't working right. So, all right. So we want to go ahead and, sorry, something's broken for me. There we go. All right. So let's zoom in a little bit more. So we saw that the trend of people we see that people are scanning daily. So people are try again. We're seeing some sort of trend. So we see this, you see the blue is last year, continuous or daily. Those numbers are pretty consistent between the two of them. But we see that the pink bar on the weekly, that's going up. So they're actually lowering the frequency of their scans. And the decrease in that frequency can have certain repercussions.
Yeah, Jimmy, also it's, for organizations, it's really about finding that balance between the frequency that they're doing their audits and sort of the chance that vulnerabilities are going to enter into their organization and how they go approach the remediation phase of that as well. So it's a balance that I think organizations are trying to work out how to best flow with as well. But it's a sign it's getting farther out.
That's a good point. And it also could have impact from 0 days. So if you're not continuously monitoring, you could be having a 0 day that, if you're weekly, you could effectively have a 0 day sitting there stagnant for math is hard, for 6 or 7 days before you can even pick it up and go from there. Exactly. All right. And so now, the next topic was, sorry, I get an echo, was impact by open source, by software supply chain or open source vulnerabilities. Now, this was a 2-part question. It's like one side of it was, how were you impacted? And the other side is like, what kind of actions did you take? So we can see here, now this is one that the 2 questions, the first 2 questions we didn't have from last year, but they were like last year, they were 1. So the trends are kind of similar. We had to patch libraries, about 40% had to patch libraries that were vulnerable and malicious. And then the other side is we had to patch our build process. And then of course there's a 12% similar that say they did not have these issues. Now the other side of it is, what things did you do in response to this? We see that there was also a drop in, now this isn't saying people stopped investing in open source software security, but they didn't add to the tooling that they're using. So like last year, I think that's 60%, that dropped down 10% to 50%. The other aspect is they also dropped the spend on new education for the developers. And that kind of starts to take it out of the mindset of the developers.
Yeah, it's definitely clear that we see, a large number of organizations impacted by vulnerabilities coming in each year. So, you can look at those numbers, but, at the same time, we must remain vigilant in the fight against it. And that means like continuing the effort to educate and train the development teams is key to being successful here and just being able to attack the vulnerabilities.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so now we're kind of looking at some trends in the kinds of tooling and security processes people use. So we can see there's kind of a mixed delta in the tools. We see that like software composition analysis. Now, again, that acronym, sorry. software composition analysis, like what is in my software, what things am I using, and then SAST. I'm writing first-party code. Does my first-party code have vulnerabilities? We see that software composition analysis has gone up. The numbers are really small here, like 5%. That's not negligible, but SAST dropped a little bit. Other aspects that went through, we see licenses. This might be something that's license and secret scanning. Secret scanning seems pretty obvious because we want to make sure we don't leak our API tokens. But license scanning, people don't often consider the risk that's involved with licenses. Knowing which license types your application's dependencies use, that lets you proactively verify, are you carrying under license? Do I have a license that says I'm using this? That means I have to share the code that I'm using.
License compliance is still a big important piece for organizations in the software supply chain. It's important to understand what you're bringing in, especially through that bill of materials, and just get a good grip on that and make sure you're compliant. Yep.
Right. Now here's the dependency analysis was pretty much unchanged. This is a yes, no. Are you checking them? One thing that is really that, as I said, some things go down, but some things go up, and it ends up being a good thing. We saw a trend. Some people don't track dependencies at all. That's perfectly legitimate. Maybe they're not using open source. Last year, 25% of people were only tracking direct dependencies. So think about when you're using software, using open source, you pull in one library. Well, that one library needs a bunch of other libraries. Those other libraries might have vulnerabilities in it. If you're not tracking your indirect dependencies, you could still have vulnerabilities lurking. So this is actually it's a little bit, but there's a trend from direct only or no to an increase in direct and indirect dependency scanning.
Yeah, it's good to see that trend going that way, Jamie, because it's really important to track all those dependencies to give you a clear understanding of your risk from all angles that these vulnerabilities can enter in, whether it's directly or indirectly coming through. So it's important to get a control of that and insight.
Yeah, and related to this, the question of automated package analysis. So we had questions of how do you do it? How do you figure it? How do you pick which libraries you use? Let's put it that way. There was a little bit of the overall dependency analysis that was kind of stable, but one thing that the fact that people kind of went from I'm looking at static information versus I'm having tools help me, that was an encouraging increase. Mm-hmm. Other things that you can do is Snyk has Snyk Advisor. It's it's a widely thing used in the industry to kind of pick the health. You can also look at your package managers or package ecosystems themselves. They will provide information, but you always want to try to use at least two different things to get a good gauge for that. And if you're in the bottom group that says I don't check the safety, you might want to reconsider and at least do something. We used to say don't get on the front page for the wrong reason. So if we I lost it, didn't click. There we go. All right, so now we're getting into prioritization and SLAs. So SLAs, service level agreement. There's SLAs, SLOs. What are you agreeing to? What is your objective, and what are you really doing? The question here is, a lot of organizations, they're going to have rules for how long do we have to be able to resolve or fix higher critical severity vulnerabilities. And we're seeing that what's the SLA for fixing these? It looks like less than a week is about the less than a week, or even shorter are the SLAs. But we're seeing that more than half the time people are breaking these things. And that's really, these are really where we start to see the signs of vuln fix fatigue coming in. We already know that developers outnumber security team members by, again, this is another pick a random number, but it's a lot, and security teams get overwhelmed. And that's really why it's really imperative to get the development team involved. All right, so that wraps up the first section. I'm going to kind of run through some takeaways, and we'll get Richard's taking this. So we're seeing like hints of AppSec fatigue. We kind of alluded to that, but there's good advancements. We're seeing that SLAs are getting missed, but we are seeing shifts to automation. We are seeing better dependency tracking for indirect dependencies and not just those direct dependencies. Richard, I think you had added some takeaways or actions to take here.
Yeah, some actions that we can, take from this is, really don't sacrifice those daily scans, or you're going to find yourself behind, definitely with understanding 0-day vulnerabilities enter into your organization. It's trying to find that balance there, as I said earlier, of getting those audits done. If you can do them more daily, let's try to do that. Keep on top of things, but keep your tools and your training sharp. That's key as well. This means securing across the whole software supply chain, but also through your development life cycle as well. And let's take a look at those SLAs, really factoring in the actual risk to the organization and not just the static scores that you could build up. Look at ways of better prioritization and sort of tackling that remediation of issues as well. And I also just want to add here is that, AppSec, keep up the good work and don't get discouraged at all, but also lean on and look towards security champions in your organization, your development organization. And if you don't have a security champion program, it might be worthwhile looking into one and trying to implement that in your organization, because they can really help take the load off your shoulders and distribute that through the development organization as well.
And that sounds, that ties into that security education aspect as well. I liked your comment about prioritizing on risk rather than just static scores, because when you look at, you get your list of vulnerabilities, you're going to see all these things, you're going to have criticals. It's going to happen. But if that critical's if that's in your dev environment and not exposed, that's not as important to fix as maybe that medium that's in prod. So
exactly. Right. Fix early if you can.
Yes, good point. All right, so now next we're going to kind of do a little shift here. This is supply chain security. Again, gloom and doom topics here, but we're not going to take it that way. So from a software supply chain security. So again, software supply chain, we mean, the term SBOM. SBOM is always associated with software supply chain security. We're very aware that supply chain security is way much more than that. Software supply chain is really a broad set of technologies. There's no way to encapsulate or gauge that all of this into one question. So this section, this is really meant to be as much thought provoking as are you doing these things? So now when you're talking to vendors, you're talking to people, no single vendor is going to help you secure your entire software supply chain. There's too much to it. If they say they can, they either don't know what it really means, or they're not being honest. In this thing, there's a few different themes in this. There's some things. What is in your applications? The composition, SBOM thing. These parts are a good example. You might not need to, if you're monitoring anything with SEA, but really SBOMs are a great way to package up and to know what are in your applications. Some other things that were put in: software pipeline security. So if you think of software development, there's more than just the code you're writing. There are the tools that you're using to build your software. There's your source code management. What are the permissions? Who can do what? Who's allowed to commit code? Who's allowed to change the build pipeline? And then some of the processes start getting into the flows there. All right, so then if we talk about these things now, with this, the types of things that we associate with software, the types of scanning we associate with software supply chain security, no single one of these things is really across the board. So we can see, and this is also a little thing. If you're paying attention, the numbers on this question, percentages, were a little bit different than the last time. That's a different. The question was asked slightly differently. Which security practices do you use? Now, we do see that software composition, SEA, and SAST are used by about 2/3 of the people that responded. We don't have the granularity in the way these responses are to find out, is it the same 2/3 or is it a third overlap, or how do these bars kind of really work? So, but hopefully somebody's doing some of these things. That's just over half are scanning IAC. Now, IAC, if you're using infrastructure as code to deploy your applications and deploy your infrastructure, it's really important to be scanning that and making sure, like, if you find something wrong, fix it in the config, don't fix it in the cloud console. But another thing that's new is DAS, like, dynamic application security testing. Think of this as a black box testing your application from the outside. It really covers kind of the same things that SaaS does, but it does it after the fact. And, as a side note, you may have heard Snyk recently acquired Probly. They're, experts in this space. So we're probably going to hear a lot more about that. And then, like, one last little takeaway here, there's the container image scanning. This is actually at, almost only half of like SCA. And one of the things that you need to think about is just because your application and your libraries that your application is pulling in, you might be resolving the issues in there, but they could also still be in the containers that you're shipping. That could, like, you could have inherited that from the base image. So think about when you're doing this, as Richard mentioned earlier on, check everywhere.
And just before you move on there, Jimmy, misconfigurations in IAC is one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest areas of vulnerabilities. Entering in is just simple, problems and misconfigurations that go on and you're deploying your software, and that's where the security vulnerability enters. So it's important to cover everything.
Nice. I have to fix my slides because I got us messed up again. All right. So, all right. Now this ties into what Richard said earlier. This is the concept of securing across the SDLC. So we can see. So think about when you've got your applications. Snyk is very much in the shift left, but meaning get things fixed early as soon as possible. Like if you're the developer and you're picking an open source library to use, you need an algorithm, you need something to help you with collections. Find the tool, find the library you want. Check it early because your implementation is going to be based pretty much on what that is. So check it in your IDE, check it in your CLI, check it in your build system. If you're the security part of the security team, make sure your developers have the tools to do these things on their own. But it's like trust but verify. Make sure you've got those guardrails. I like to see, like, the pink bar on the right. I like to see them going up because it means that people are doing more. At each of these places, you don't see like, hey, all of a sudden there's a big drop in one of these. So this is a really good trend that each of these areas are increasing. Now CLI and IDE, depending on the tools you're using, that might be something that is, one replaces the other occasionally. That might not necessarily be a bad thing that somebody's not doing both. So I don't know if you have anything.
It's key to get it sort of into the life cycle as early as possible so the developers can easily fix and resolve those things at package selection even, versus wait to deployment and find issues then.
Right. All right. So this one's kind of crazy. This is another one of those. Here's a lot of questions. This is like the lack of maturity in vulnerability analysis. And this really kind of starts to come to play when you're thinking about where are you checking and what are you using to determine your risk. Now, this is something I think Richard said, it was way early on in this. It seems like it's been forever. It is risk versus static scores. Now, one thing I want to say about this slide, like, we got some bars on here all the way to the right. Well, this is the way the graph works. Those all the way to the right, those are really still less than 50%. So some of the areas, these first two things, these are like the bare minimum. These are, it's better than no prioritization method, but this can be where a lot of this fatigue comes in. It's thinking that I need to fix I need to fix the critical CVSS score vulnerabilities, and I need to fix them now. Well, yeah, you probably do need to fix them, but they might not be the right ones to do. This is a static number. It doesn't take your environment into consideration, doesn't take where you're running, doesn't take how you're building. Now, when you start looking at these, it's kind of as we're going down here, sort of. Exploit prediction scoring system, EPSS. This is really, and the related exploit maturity or social media aspects. And like if something's trending, people might be more interested in saying, hey, I can figure out how to do this. These start to take into consideration the world around you. I'm not going to say your context, but they're taking into consideration the bigger picture. And then when you start looking, again, it's like we're also seeing somewhat of a decrease as we go. Reachability is where we start to see a little bit more personalized scoring. You've got the exploit EPSS scores and things like that, which are giving you a gauge of like, how big is it really? Well, reachability is something that it adds to the solution, but it's not necessarily the silver bullet, because reachability, it's not necessarily, it's a nice indicator. And the goal of it is it tells you, hey, your code does pretty much probably call this. It's never going to tell you your code does not call this. So it's a believe it when it, to me, it's a believe it when it says yes, but when it says, it doesn't ever say no, I guess. It's probably thing. And then when you start thinking about next gen stuff, business context, deployment status, these are the things that are really going to be game changers. We'll say, I hate to say that, but it's like, deployment status. I don't need to fix a vulnerability if it's just sitting in my image registry. I mean, I need to fix it, but I don't need to fix it first. If it's not deployed, I don't need to fix it. And then the business context.
Yeah, all these attributes are really important to help, as an organization, prioritize what's coming in for vulnerabilities. And it goes right back into that earlier SLA conversation we had of, helping you with that is if you can pinpoint the ones that are most critical to your organization, you fix those first, and then you get through, the backlog of other things that you're trying to address. But this type of information and data insights allows that flexibility and saves you from that fatigue that we're seeing AppSec teams struggling with, that they can really pinpoint and focus developers into the right things that's most critical for the business.
Yeah, and like one of the things we alluded to before, people missing their SLAs. Well, the SLAs, they're made on that. They're made on those top two lines. It's the CVSS score. If it's critical, this is the one you fix. But you miss that SLA. But is that the one you should be prioritizing? I think SLAs and prioritization from that standpoint should be taking these things into consideration as well.
Exactly.
All right, so let's see where we are now. All right. Oh, here we go. Takeaways. We probably just said stuff we were going to say on this slide. So some takeaways. So, like what we're saying, we're seeing good trends in preventive monitoring, and it might be helping offset that slow new tool purchases. But again, relying on static prioritization, that's hard to say, big words. Static prioritization techniques that can really, they can add to the uncertainty and the pressure and that kind of analysis paralysis and fatigue.
Yeah. So some of the actions that we can, Jamie, talk about getting earlier in the life cycle. So those pre-commit checks are nice, but let's get the security going earlier than that. It's much nicer and easier to sort of fix things and look for things earlier in the development process. And if you can resolve that before you're even getting into, the later stages of development and pre-release, etc., it's key from that. And then capturing them SBOMs and document that so you can track the software, especially in the software supply chain. It's really key to understand what's coming in from your vendors, what you're going out to your customers, etc. So you got a full insight into what's going on with your software, how many vulnerabilities are in there, try to negate all of those. But the ways you tackle that is through, prioritization of your vulnerabilities that you've uncovered, leverage those holistic and those dynamic attributes that we talked about, those techniques to really reduce the fatigue, allowing you to fix smarter, essentially. If you can really tailor and focus in your organization into the most critical ones for your business, tackle those first, and then, work on chipping away at the others. That's one of the key takeaways from that.
Yeah, great. All right, now we're 2 sections into 4 sections, but I promise these 2 sections are a lot shorter. Section 3 is one that was fun last year. So, Richard, you're gonna say something? Sorry.
No, I was just
okay. Great. All right, so section 3, continued misplaced confidence in the security of AI generated code. You can't make it through a news day without hearing something about AI, good and bad. This is like kind of the dichotomy of generative AI. We saw similar results to this last year. It's a discrepancy. You've probably seen the memes of like what people think I do and what I really do. That discrepancy between the expectations and reality of AI generated code. And again, in this case, we see, we know that more people are using generative AI to help the developers write code. About, of this, how many people think that AI generated code is improving their organization's code security? We see here an overwhelming number, very similar to last year, 77, 78% think that it is improving their code security. Some people are saying, no, it's not. Again, similar numbers. Some are not sure, and some don't know that their developers are really using Gen AI. So there's a strong belief that it is helping code security. But the other side of that is, how many vulns has AI introduced into your code? There's some, very few, some a lot, but most, it's a moderate amount. About 50%, 60% say a moderate amount or a lot. That's more than zero. And again, this is first party code. This is not just open source. Like, generative AI can make you pull in other stuff, but it can also be including things like SQL injection or cross-site scripting, things that developers are trained and know they need to kind of watch out for. All right. So concern for risks introduced. Now, it might be this kind of ties to what I just alluded to in the last one. Gen AI might be suggesting code that requires new libraries. And there's two different sides to this. If the licenses for those libraries aren't compatible with the org's policy, there can be an issue. And there can also be hidden issues. What data sets were the backing? If you're talking about AI, if you're using AI as a tool to generate your code, these things could be hidden. Like, AI generates code, but what is that model that's writing the code? The model that the AI is using, what was it trained on? Was it trained on everything, meaning that it didn't care what the copyrights were? So now you've got snippets of copyrighted code unbeknownst to you in your code, and you might be violating copyrights just because your AI generated code that fits in there.
Yeah, definitely. And this is one of the areas I call out, that the old approach is like trust but verify here for generative AI is important for organizations. It's a great thing. I love it, but you definitely have to verify, what's the truth behind it, and where are you getting that truth, as you pointed out, Jimmy. It's really important. And you have to make sure you're testing all your code paths, whether it's coming directly from open source, from the communities, or whether it's Gen AI now generating that stuff for you and pulling it from the open source communities as well. So you just have to be careful and verify it and test it.
Yep. Treat it like handwritten code. Don't assume it's safe. We saw people think it's doing better, but it might not be. Exactly. All right, some takeaways. Again, we probably just stole our thunder. Automation, AI risks, their opportunities. There is a disconnect between the real world and actual experiences.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so some of the good actions that we can come out of this is, spelling out and talking about and forming your organization's policies on the usage of AI code generators is really important for an organization to get a good grasp of what it is, how they want to deal with it, how they're going to engage their development organization with it. So by clearly defining those policies allows everyone to understand how and when they can utilize this stuff and how they want to treat it. And like just you pointed out, treating AI generated code just the same scrutiny and levels of testing and verification and remediation, just as your handwritten code is as well. And I think the important bits here is just continue to educate your developers on AI as well as security practices, and what's positive about it and what's the negative of it. So everyone's aware, they know how you're dealing with that as an organization and how they want to build that into their coding practices. So again, educating developers on AI just the same way as the security practices is really important here.
Yeah, and make sure that you're using your Gen AI tools are using libraries that are, or models that are trained on on licenses that actually allow that and generate code that way. All right, so this is a section 4 is really a high level trends and overall health of the open source ecosystem with compared to fixing vulns and really compared to proprietary code. This is interesting because this is like open source time to fix. It's for critical and high severity vulnerabilities. We see that things are going down. Now, Elixir is like the anomaly here, that it's higher, but apparently last year was 0. I don't know if that meant we didn't have this data or not. A lot of these things, because of the way Snyk is, we're monitoring vulnerabilities, we're monitoring databases, we're monitoring fixes. So we can see, just from the available data, we can tell this is how long these have been, vulnerabilities may have been dwelling when they've been fixed in those versions. So we see a really nice trend that, Go looks like Go and Swift look like the biggest improvements, but it's seeing them, each of these drop is a really encouraging aspect. Now, just kind of in comparison, the open source community really still outpaces proprietary. We're starting to see that little trend, and that the pink bar is getting bigger. In this case, bigger is not better. Smaller is better because this is time to fix. So we are seeing this does mesh with some of those SLA misses that we alluded to and we saw in some of the previous slides.
Yeah, but the communities at large typically are stepping up these days and taking more responsibility, more responsive to fixing vulnerabilities and to the impact these cause for the project. So they really want to do good by the users and the community as well at large. And you can see the results that they are looking to resolve a lot quicker these days.
Yep. All right. So some takeaways. Open source community is becoming more responsive, that they're becoming more efficient. They're getting better at fixing these things. And, that could also be I don't remember the number, but we had, I think thus far this year, there's already been 30,000 new vulnerabilities discovered. So not all like criticals and stuff, but that's a lot. That ties in the proprietary teams, a little bit of slippage. I think there's ways that people can get, proprietary developers groups can get past that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and some of the actions to take away from here is, again, prioritizing smarter, as we talked about, really checking earlier in the software life cycle. Earlier you can, the better, the cheaper it is. And check everywhere, not just the open source coming in, not just your handwritten code, but the Gen AI code. It's important to look at all aspects of it, dependencies. It's key for understanding and getting a true picture of your security posture is important.
Yeah, I like your comment earlier, the trust but verify. Check everywhere in the SDLC. Check it in your IDE. Make sure it doesn't get past your build pipeline. All right, so I'm going to run through some quick high level conclusions here. Some kind of recap some of these things. This is kind of showing that the industry, we got to find new ways to balance security requirements with team capacity. That means more effective prioritization, more fix. AI gets stuff done fast. It writes code fast, but it writes vulns fast too. So really kind of think about it that way. Reassess your approach to security to prevent burnout, improve that prioritization, prioritize the adoption of fundamental supply chain security measures. It means, deploy newer measures to improve security, include more holistic risk analysis, a part of the SLA determination, not just using the raw numbers, but, take into consideration those metrics when you're defining your SLAs of what you're supposed to be solving, and use that as your tools. And then take that measured approach to Gen AI. And Richard just said this, that same scrutiny as first party code. Mm-hmm. All right. Now, further secure your software supply chain. Some of these things that we kind of alluded to. This is an orthogonal view. This is where we talked a little bit about Snyk, but take this, whether it's Snyk or not, take these things to heart and think about where you're checking things and think about how you're prioritizing. So when you're looking at risk prioritization, and we know severity score, we know EPSS, those are great. Other things to take into consideration are things like availability. Is this running? Is it in my dev? Is it just something that's sitting in a box that we're not running at this point? Or is it in, is it in production? Is it a production thing? What is the business criticality? Is this part of my billing system? Does it have ties to like direct customer data? Does money go through it basically? There's some other things that we talked about in the other types of risk factors, things like that, exploit maturity, things like that. But some other things are things like reachability. So when we talk about reachability, there's like a couple different aspects that we have. Like one is dependency level reachability. That is just traditional software composition analysis. That is the package that I'm using, the version of the package that I'm using, does it have a vulnerability? Yes or no? That's what that dependency level is, or indirect as well. There's also this concept of static. We mentioned this before, static or function level reachability. It's that other one, but I have a function that's calling the function that has that vulnerability in it. And then there's this other concept of, how close to the internet is it? Is this thing that has the vulnerability sitting on the edge and it's an ingress point? That's something to take into consideration, because that means it's one stop away. And if you've got a vulnerability there and you're not sanitizing some of your inputs, for example, you could be a lot more applicable. And when you start thinking about all these things, if you've got something that it's got a exploit available, it's got a high severity vulnerability, it's got business, it's critical to your business, it's deployed and it's on an endpoint. Those are things that's like each of those little ticks say that's the one I got to fix first. And then there's also a concept of runtime intelligence of, yes, it's in there. Maybe these things are all coming into play, but it's also the package that has vulnerability is actually loaded. Snyk, we do this via a risk score and additional risk factors. And what it really does is that type of methodology lets you figure out what are these priorities and take into consideration your business context. Whatever tool you use, make sure you're taking these things into consideration. I'm going to kind of delve down how you can, there's two different pieces I've mentioned before. There's the concept of securing your code, and then there's the stuff that is going through it. Make sure you're scanning your custom code. Richard told us, he mentioned treat it with the same level of scrutiny as your, AI code as other things. Check your open source dependencies, scan them, assess the risk via them early and often across the SDLC. Check your containers. IAC, find and fix the misconfigurations early. Like a lot of big incidents you hear about are, somebody left an S3 bucket open. And, SBOMs. Go ahead, Richard.
I was just saying, that's one of the biggest areas, misconfigurations.
SBOMs, they're important. It's kind of like that ingredient list. Ask your any third-party vendors that you're consuming services from. Ask them for the SBOMs, scan them, test them. And then this is really kind of outside of our what we would normally be talking about, but we want to make sure you're thinking about your software supply chain. Vet all those third-party tools. We just said with SBOMs, they're usually going to have some sort of security things. Source code management. That it's the thing that I think people overlook. And you've got your code in GitHub or GitLab or something, and who has the rights to change that code? Can a developer go in, put in code and merge it themselves versus at least have another set of eyes look at it? Make sure you got your, maybe you should be doing things like code signing, things like that, making sure that it's the right people. Make sure you have the integrity in your build pipelines and who has the rights to change them. And finally, secrets and credentials, make sure you're doing something to continuously scan and make sure that these are not committed to your repos. I ran through those last couple things real quick. Richard, do you want anything on those two slides that I blew through there?
No, it's good, Jimmy. I think you covered it pretty nicely.
All right, now we've got a few minutes. All right, so then here I'm gonna show this one, and I'm gonna go to the next. The report is available. Like I said, the web page, the fund web page one isn't available yet. There's a QR code. I'm well aware that this is a security webinar, so nobody might be scanning that. I promise it's just pointing to that URL. You can always look at it. I'm going to leave that up on the next slide. I think we're going to jump into Q&A. I already see, I've got it running in the background, but I see there's been a bunch of questions coming in. We're going to go to just the Q&A section here. And I don't know if you were monitoring, Richard, but I know I saw a few coming in. All right, so I'm gonna read them, and I might take them myself. I might throw them to you, or I'll read them and you see if you want to. Well, this is the part where we didn't practice. All right, how frequently should we be auditing? I know that you said it a couple times, Richard, but you have any thoughts on this as a bigger picture?
Yeah, and we saw from the metrics there and the data we gathered that it's definitely extending out to weekly, monthly timelines now, but it's really not enough. Where you're looking to get to is a practice where if you're not doing it continuously, to at least be doing it on a daily basis to monitor and audit your code and your applications of any vulnerabilities that could be entering in there. With 0 days, they could pop up at any time. You want to make sure that you've got a practice in place that you can find those, identify those, know where they're being used in your applications so you can solve that. So we recommend at least daily, but if you can't get to a daily practice, then weekly at the outset, but nothing, more than that. We wouldn't recommend that.
Okay. You mentioned DAST and API security as processes, but do you have data around them? I think they're asking about survey data.
Yeah. We don't have a lot of data around DAST and API. And Jimmy, you brought out that we did just acquire a company there, probably. So I recommend people to go out, look at that, and get a little bit more detail around it. But definitely around DAST and API security, it's two big areas around your security practice and the processes that you want to put in place to get a good holistic program going. But I would expect, with Snyk, that we will have a lot more data on DAST and API security included in this survey next year. So look to that for questions around that to understand that better and introduce that into this report.
Right. This one, I think, kind of, I hit the mic, sorry. What level of SLAs do you recommend? That was the whole question. So you take that out. I'll let you take that however you want it.
Level of SLAs, yeah. Do you recommend? Well, putting SLAs in place to start with is a good practice. That's a starting point. But we've seen there that, organizations are really eager and have really tight SLAs, but I wouldn't recommend readjusting those SLAs in your organization. But let's look at the actual resolution times that you're able to do as an organization and strive to step up so that you can remediate those faster, you can get them resolved quicker. So look at those practices and help build out how you prioritize and sort of select the ones to attack first is key. That's ultimately where you want to get to, is a good practice of identification and remediation of the most critical and business impactful vulnerabilities first.
I like that. I'll add a little bit to that. So you're often SLAs are given. Make sure you're tracking. You've got your SLA, you got your SLO. That's your objective. Hopefully your objective is better than the agreement, but you've also got your SLI. It's like where we are. Make sure you're tracking these things, but start thinking about getting your organization to take into consideration the more context aware things. Look at the misses that you've had and figure out, were these misses things we should have been working on, or did we miss one because we were working on something we shouldn't have been working on? I think here's another one that I think kind of ties to that. So what is the key? What would you say, Richard, is the key best practice to remediating vulnerabilities? I'm assuming it means open source vulnerabilities at this point.
Some key practice for remediation, really getting an understanding of your applications in place and the context that they're shipping under. And once you're uncovering vulnerabilities, to then tackle it from a sense of using those attributes we said, scores around it, CVSS scores, your exploitable scores to help you get down into, is this really exploitable? Get at that data like reachability. That will help you. And as you apply these sort of filters on the issues themselves, you can then look at the context of your business apps and how they're potentially being impacted and how important and critical they are to you. So having that way of prioritizing to which subset you remediate first and foremost, and then tackle the rest of the backlog going forward there. That's the best practice, is really understanding and utilizing those key attributes to get those vulnerabilities narrowed down a little bit to have the developers more focused and resolve quicker.
Yeah. I'll throw that out there. I'll augment this just a little bit, that it also depends on if you're talking about coming at this from a developer standpoint or from AppSec or security standpoint. If you're on the security team, the best way to do this, the best practice, is to make sure your developers have the tools they need to find and figure out how to fix these vulnerabilities. They don't want to be security experts. They want to write code. Make sure they have those tools. We saw that little drop in security education expense, investment. Fight for that. Fight to get the developers the tools and the experience that they need to learn how to write better code. All right, I got an open. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Richard.
I'm saying that learning and continuous education of the developer is important for that practice as well.
All right, I think we got time for one more question. This one's open ended, so I'm going to throw it out there, Richard, and hopefully a bust doesn't come. What are the key challenges Snyk anticipates in the open source security landscape over the next couple of years, and how are we going to address them? And I'm going to twist the question. I'm going to say, Richard, what are your thoughts? Not necessarily Snyk's thoughts.
Yeah, my thoughts on that. Good, thanks. Not expecting that. The way I'm looking at this is getting a clear insight to a holistic view of your organization from security, from front right to the tail end. And that looks at different things like open source, your SEA, your static analysis testing, your dynamic testing, your API security, all these aspects of really understanding pre to deployment and into production, and ongoing monitoring from that is key. So having the insights into what's being tested and the ongoing monitoring of that is important, as well as then applying your remediation practice on top of that. So that's the biggest challenge, I think, for companies going forward, is just getting a true grasp on their whole organization and getting the insight and security. And once they can do that, they can start tackling the issues and the ongoing monitoring and keeping up with their security practice and getting a real view of their security posture for their applications.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, hi team. I'm joining you again with good news and bad news. The good news is this has been an absolutely fabulous chat, and we have a questions window full of great questions. The bad news is we're going to have to leave it there because we are out of time. I wish we could keep going, and you've given us so much to think about. I do want to ask, before I let you wrap up, Jamie, maybe I can put you in the hot seat because you've been grilling Richard for a little while here, which I love. What would you say to anyone out there in the audience that's looking for a next step, other than we've got the report linked on screen? It's also linked in the handouts tab. I heard from someone they needed to refresh before it showed up, so you might need to do a quick browser refresh to see that report in the handouts tab, but that is linked there, again, also on the screen. That's a great follow-up. Jamie, what else? What's the next step to getting started with Snyk?
Just to throw this out here, I didn't actually realize this, but you can click it in the slides too.
Yes.
Okay. So next steps, figure out and look at the questions that we asked here and ask yourself these same questions about what is your organization using, or maybe more importantly, what is your organization not using, and make sure that try to figure out, do our developers have in place these guardrails that they need? Do they have the tools? Do we teach them? It's learn.snyk.io, I think that's still the URL, is a great place for developers. There's free resources there to learn about security. Snyk Advisor helps you pick better packages, also teaches you things about security itself. sign up for a free trial of Snyk. It's easy to onboard stuff. You can point it at your source code repos, and it can do some preliminary scans. Download the CLI tools and things like that. If you're not doing something, do something for software security. Something's
I
better
love
than
that.
nothing.
Do something is our key takeaway. And I really appreciate that there's some educational resources that you've called out there. I think both of you hit on that, the importance of that kind of ongoing iterative learning, as well as, investing in new technology, investing in how we learn and educate ourselves as professionals and members of the team. So I want to thank both of you for joining us and for giving us so much insight. Like I said, we talked about this at the top. It is so great to read these reports. It's a whole other thing to feel them really, to breathe life into them, to understand how they fit into our world outside of the report itself. So I want to thank both of you for coming and being a part of this discussion today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
All right. And to everyone who asked some great questions, keep in mind that we are going to send those over to the Snyk team. So we're going to sneak them on over to Snyk. We're going to send those on over to Snyk, and we will get responses back to all of you. So if you have a question that you haven't asked and you want to get that in, you want to sneak it in. Oh, I'm on fire today. Sneak those questions in, and we will make sure that they get sent on over to Snyk. I do want to say, Greg, I see your shout out. I love that. Thank you so much for that high five. I agree. I also think it was a great show today. We got into a really, really exciting conversation. And again, lots more to do. So you're going to click on the link on the screen, or you're going to visit it in the handouts tab. You're going to make sure that you visit the Snyk website, spend some time looking through those resources and follow up on the conversation that we just had. And I am also going to give away a prize. Are you ready? We have a $250 Amazon gift card going to someone who is here live and present at the webinar. And that special someone today is Richard Lannard from Georgia. Richard Lannard from Georgia. Congratulations to you, Richard. As always, we will get in touch about your prize after we wrap the webinar, so stay tuned for that. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to once again thank Snyk for making this webinar possible, especially to our wonderful speakers, to Jamie and to Richard. You have given us so much to think about today. But as always, my biggest high five, my biggest thank you is going to go to all of you. I said this at the top. We're right in that preseason holiday rush. There's a lot going on. There's lots of stress and pressure in the office, and everybody, I'm sure, is getting ready for people to be out of office. And you took time out of your day today to take that deep breath, to join in this conversation, to stretch your understanding and your knowledge base in this collaborative community of learners. And I really appreciate that. That means so much to me as a person to be able to spend these days with you. And as I said, especially because I think I'm a conversation-based learner, if that wasn't clear from all of the other webinars that you have joined with me on them. I really, really like to talk things through, and that helps me really understand them. So the reports are great and they're important, and I need to be able to scan through that data and take in the insight through those visual aids. But it really, really helps solidify it for me when we can come together like this, talk about it with an expert, help them kind of unpack and understand how this really fits into what we're talking about in our day-to-day lives. So I hope that's how you're feeling today. I hope this has really kind of brought that into 3 dimensions for you. And I know that I'm walking away mulling a lot of this over. I hope you are as well. I really look forward to seeing all of you at a webinar again soon. And until then, have an absolutely beautiful end to your day. Thanks all.